Keith and Patti. A love story, written, produced, and directed by Barron Darby, narrated by Jessica Ann Bogart. Prologue. I will tell you about a quiet house at 3 a.m. because the whole marriage is folded up inside it. It is an old house in Connecticut, the kind with low beams and crooked floors and more books than any one person could read in 3 lifetimes. And the books are everywhere, stacked on the stairs and double-shelved to the ceiling and left open. Spine up, on every surface a man can set a book down on. In a deep chair in the middle of all those books there is a man, asleep. He has a paperback open on his chest, rising and falling. There is a skull ring on his finger and a cold cup of tea gone gray on the table beside him. The third one tonight, none of them finished. He is, by a wide and well-documented margin, one of the most dangerous-looking men who has ever made a living. A man the world spent decades insisting could not be killed. A man who has outlived every prediction anyone ever made about him. And right now, he is snoring gently with a library book sliding off his ribs. The woman coming down the stairs in her socks is not surprised to find him there. She has been finding him there for 40 years. She lifts the book off his chest and marks his page, because he will want the page, and she pulls a blanket up over the most dangerous man in rock and roll the way you cover a child who has fought sleep and lost. And she stands there a second looking at him in the lamplight. She is a girl from Staten Island who grew up one of 6 at a loud Lutheran table, who became one of the most photographed faces in America, and then walked away from most of it to come here, to this house, to this man, to this exact small task of marking his page and covering him up at 3 a.m. This is the love story, not the stages, not the noise. A woman in her socks, marking a page, pulling up a blanket in a house full of books at 3 a.m. for the 40,000th time. If you have arrived here knowing every riff he ever played, welcome. If you have arrived here having never knowingly heard a note, welcome to you too, because you do not need the songs to understand this. This is not a story about a band. This is a story about a man who survived everything the world could throw at him and discovered to his own great surprise that surviving was the easy part. Staying was the whole art. He had to be taught that, late, by a Staten Island girl with a harbor in her, and the teaching took the rest of both their lives, and it is still going on tonight, under a blanket, in the lamplight. I want you to know the shape of it before we begin. A girl from an island in New York Harbor and a boy from a gray town in England both got pulled, young, toward the loud, bright machinery of fame, and both of them got chewed by it in their separate ways before they ever met. She was a cover girl who never quite believed the cover. He was a legend who was running out of the road that legends run out of. They met in 1979, inside the loudest, brightest, most dangerous room of that whole dangerous era. And what he found in her was not another spark, because he had had enough sparks to burn the world down. What he found was a floor. What he found was a place to stand. This is the story he tells when people ask him how he is still alive. And he has a good one. He says she saved him plainly, without drama, the way you state a fact you have made peace with. And she will tell you, just as plainly, that she did not save anybody. She just loved a man and kept the porch light on, and that the man did the saving himself the day he decided he wanted to be around for the ordinary life instead of the burning one. They are both right. That argument is the marriage. Love is hard. Love is worth it. and the kind of love that walks a survivor home and teaches him the harder trick of staying, that kind of love stays. Let me show you a man who could survive anything, and the woman who taught him that surviving was never the point. Part 1. 2 Islands. Chapter 1. Patti, the girl from the harbor. The first thing you need to understand about me is that I am an island girl, and I do not mean somewhere with palm trees. I mean Staten Island, in New York Harbor, with the ferry and the gulls and the smell of the water. And that island made me before anything else got a chance to, and I have spent my whole life being secretly, stubbornly proud of it. I grew up one of 6 children in a house that was loud the way only a big family is loud, where there was always somebody hollering up the stairs and somebody else hollering back down them, and not enough of anything to go around except noise and food and church. My people were working people. We were Lutheran, and we were serious about it, and Sunday was not a suggestion in our house. It was the hinge the whole week turned on. We went to church, and then we came home, and we ate at a table that had to be stretched with a leaf, and still was not big enough, elbow to elbow, everybody talking at once, my mother moving around the edges of it like she had 8 arms. I learned at that table, before I learned anything else, that love in a big family is not a feeling you announce. It is a seat you are given, and a plate that gets filled whether there is enough or not. You make enough. That is the whole Staten Island theology of my childhood. You make enough, and you set another place, and nobody who shows up at the door leaves hungry. I want to be honest about the kind of girl I was, because it matters a great deal later. I was not the wild one, whatever the magazines decided to make of me. I was a tomboy and a worker, a girl who could outrun her brothers and was not afraid of much. But underneath the toughness, I was a church girl with a church girl's spine, raised to believe that you keep your word and you mind your people, and you do not put on airs, no matter how the world tries to dress you up. The wildness people later assigned to me was mostly other people's idea of what a girl who looked like me must be. The real me was the one who called her mother every single week of her life, who said grace, who kept the island in her pocket like a stone. She could close her hand around when the rest of the world got too bright. And the world did get bright, faster than anybody at our crowded table could have guessed. I was a teenager, a long-legged Staten Island kid, with no plan more elaborate than getting through the week when I got discovered, which is a ridiculous word for what is really just a stranger telling you your face is worth money. I did not believe it. I want you to know that. The whole time it was happening to me, this improbable rocket ride into the world of fashion, some careful island part of me stood off to the side with her arms crossed, unconvinced, certain it would all evaporate and send me back to the ferry. That doubt became the most valuable thing I owned. It is the reason none of it ever fully went to my head. You cannot get drunk on a thing you do not entirely believe is real. Let me give you the texture of that house, because the texture is the whole point. Sunday morning, there was something already going on the stove before any of us were awake, and the smell of it would pull 6 kids down the stairs like a hand on the back of your collar. There was always somebody at that table. There was always coffee going, and a dish towel over somebody's shoulder, and a Bible somewhere within reach, and the radio low, and an argument about nothing, and underneath all of it, the steady fact that you belonged, that your seat was yours, that no matter what kind of week you had brought home with you, there was a plate coming and a place that had your name on it. We were not a family with money. We were a family with enough, which I have come to believe is a richer thing. And the difference between those two is a lesson I have carried my whole life. There was always laundry drying somewhere, and a mismatched sock lost in the wash of 8 people's clothes. I learned to cook standing on a kitchen chair at my mother's elbow, and I learned at that same elbow that feeding people and loving them are the same verb, said 2 different ways. I burned things. I dropped things. Once I knocked an entire pot off the stove and stood there waiting for the world to end, and my mother just handed me a rag and told me the floor was hungry too, and that is the kind of laughter I come from, the kind that makes a mistake survivable, the kind I would need every ounce of, decades later, in a house full of books with a man who could not be trusted near an open flame. So picture me at the start of all this, before any of the rest of it, a tall island kid with a loud family and a quiet faith, a girl who could feel a glamorous, enormous life opening up in front of her like a door, and who walked through that door every single time, with one hand still closed around the stone of where she came from. I did not know yet that the bright, loud world I was walking into held a man who had been even more chewed up by it than I would ever be, a man from another island across the ocean who needed exactly the harbor I had been carrying around in my pocket since I was a child. I only knew that my mother had taught me how to set a table for whoever showed up, and that I would know my own person when he finally sat down at it, no matter how unlikely he looked when he got there. Chapter 2. Keith, the boy from Dartford. While an island girl was learning to set a table in New York Harbor, I was an only child in Dartford, England, a grey town downriver from London, learning the 2 skills that would turn out to be the whole of my education, which were how to disappear into a song and how to take a great deal of punishment and keep standing up. Let me tell you the truth about myself right at the start, because everybody finds it out eventually, and I would rather you heard it from me. I was a stubborn, scrawny, awkward boy, no good at the things boys were supposed to be good at, forever getting flung out of one thing or another for not fitting the shape they wanted. The one place I fit was music. My grandfather had a guitar, and he let me reach for it, and the day my hands first found their way around the neck of that thing was the day the rest of my life quietly began, although it would be years before any of it showed. I sang in a choir as a boy, which always makes people laugh when I tell them. The idea of me in a white surplice singing for the Queen. But it is true, and it gave me an ear, and the ear never left even when everything else got loud enough to deafen a person. Here is a thing about me that I will lead with because it explains the rest. I was built to last, and I had no idea of it. And not knowing it, I spent a long stretch of my life testing the proposition as hard as a man can test it. I have been, the world likes to say, indestructible, and I have leaned on the joke myself for decades, because it is easier than the truth. The truth is that I am not indestructible. Nobody is. But I was given an unusual amount of road before the bill came due, and I drove every inch of it like the bill was never coming. I will be honest about that without dressing it up or making it glamorous, because there is nothing glamorous in it. There were years that very nearly burned me all the way down. There was a storm I lived inside of for a long time, and I am not going to perform it for you, the storm, because the people who love a good ruin can find that story anywhere. What matters for this story, the love story, is only this. I went into those years a young man who genuinely did not expect to live very long and did not especially mind, and I came out the other side, eventually, alive and astonished about it, because somewhere deep in the storm, a door opened that I did not deserve and was not looking for, and a girl from Staten Island was standing in it. But that is getting ahead. Back then, I was a boy on a train platform in Dartford, and the whole accidental machinery of my life turned on the smallest thing, which is that another boy from my town was standing on that same platform one morning holding a stack of American records under his arm. We knew each other a little, from being small. We got to talking about the records. That conversation, those records, that platform, became a band, and the band became a life so large and so loud that it is genuinely difficult, from inside it, to remember the gray, ordinary boy who started it. But he is still in here. That is the thing nobody tells you about getting famous young. The kid you were does not leave. He just gets buried under the noise and waits. And it takes a particular kind of person, years later, to dig him back out and remind a worn-out legend that he was a real boy once, with a grandfather's guitar and a choir boy's ear and a heart that had not yet been taught the one thing it most needed to learn. Let me give you the texture of that gray town, because the gray is part of the love story, even though it came long before the love. Dartford was rain and brick, and the river going by, a place where the sky sat low over the rooftops most of the year, and a boy learned to make his own weather indoors. My grandfather, Gus, was the one who saw what I was. He was a musician himself, someone who had played in dance bands, and he kept that guitar up on a high shelf where I could see it and not reach it, which I have since decided was the most cunning act of love anyone ever performed on me, because the wanting of a thing you cannot quite reach is the engine of every good life. He would take it down and play, and I would watch his hands like they held the secret to the world, which for me, it turned out they did. When he finally let me hold it, my whole future quietly poured itself into the shape of that neck under my fingers. I was a poor student of nearly everything else, a daydreamer they kept moving from one classroom to another, hoping I would catch, and I never did catch on the things they wanted. But I caught on that guitar, completely, the way a fire catches, and nothing in my life since has ever quite put it out. I could not have guessed as a young man that the loud, enormous life I was building would deliver me, eventually, exhausted and half-wrecked and famous beyond all sense, to the one lesson I had skipped. I knew how to survive. God, did I know how to survive. I had a gift for it that frightened people. What no one had ever taught the boy from Dartford was that surviving and living are not the same thing, and that the second one is much harder, and that you cannot do it alone. I was going to have to be taught, and the teacher, though I had not met her yet, and would not have believed you if you had pointed across the ocean and named her, was an island girl with a harbor in her, setting a table, waiting for whoever showed up at the door. Chapter 3. Patti, the cover girl, who never believed it. I became, for a stretch of years in the late 1970s, one of the faces the magazines put on their covers to sell themselves. And what that was actually like from the inside is nothing at all like what it looks like from the outside. And the gap between those two things is the whole story of how I kept my soul through it. From the outside, it looks like a fairy tale. The island kid turned cover girl, and parts of it genuinely were. I worked with photographers whose names meant something. I traveled to places my Staten Island family could only have dreamed about. I made more money than anyone at our crowded childhood table had ever seen, and I am not going to stand here and pretend I did not enjoy a great deal of it, because I did, and false modesty is just vanity wearing a humble coat. My brothers thought the whole cover girl business was hilarious and said so, loudly across the breakfast table, the way a big family keeps you honest. I was good at the work. I was reliable. I showed up. I could give a camera what it needed. And in a business that runs entirely on whether you can deliver, being a girl people could count on was its own kind of talent, the same plain countable-on quality my mother had at her stretched Sunday table. Let me give you the texture of those years, because the texture is the part that does not photograph. It was early mornings in cold studios, holding a pose until your shoulders shook, being talked about in the third person while you stood right there, as though the face had arrived without a person attached. It was being told to smile and being told to stop smiling, being remade by every set of hands in the room, hair and powder and pins, until the girl in the mirror was a stranger built for the camera and the real one had gone quiet somewhere down inside. I learned to send the stranger out to do the work and keep the real Patti safe behind her, and that small daily act of holding something back, of not handing them the whole of me no matter how brightly they lit the room, is the discipline that saved my soul. And it was the same discipline I would need years later, loving a man the whole world wanted a piece of. You learn early, in that business, that everyone wants the printed you, and almost no one wants the real one, and a girl who forgets the difference gets swallowed. I never forgot it. My mother would not let me. That weekly phone call was the string tied to my ankle while I floated up into the bright, thin air, and it never once let me drift out of reach of the ground. But here is the part the fairy tale leaves out. It is a strange and lonely thing to be valued for your face. You learn fast that a great many people in that world are not interested in the person behind the face at all, that they would be just as happy if there were no person there, just the bones and the light and the camera. I watched that world chew up girl after girl who started to believe she was only the face, who had nothing underneath the cover to stand on when the cover stopped, and some of them did not survive it, and I have never forgotten them. The thing that kept me whole was the island. It was the stone in my pocket. Every week I called my mother, and she did not care one bit about any magazine. She wanted to know, was I eating? Was I praying? When was I coming home for Sunday? And that phone call, every week, was the thread that kept me tied to the real Patti while the bright world tried to convince me I was only the printed one. I lived in New York through the wildest stretch of that whole wild era, and I will not pretend I was a nun about it. I went where the beautiful, loud people went. I was at the famous rooms on the famous nights. I saw the whole glittering carnival of it up close, but I went into all of it the way I go into everything, with one hand closed around the island, watching even while I danced, never quite able to fully lose myself the way some of the others did. I was having the time of my life and keeping a careful inventory of my own soul at the same time, which is an exhausting way to have fun. But it is the only way I knew, and it is why I walked out the far side of that era with myself intact when a lot of people did not. I had no notion, dancing through those bright, loud rooms with my island stone in my pocket, that the most famous of all the dangerous men in that whole carnival was about to cross my path, and that I would look at the legend everyone was terrified of and see, underneath all the noise, a tired man who needed exactly the one thing I had been carrying around since I was a kid on the ferry. I could not have known that the harbor I kept in my pocket was about to find the person it had been for all along. I only knew, that whole glittering season, that I was somehow still myself, still my mother's daughter, still a girl who said grace and called home, dancing in the brightest room in the world with my soul in my own keeping, waiting, though I could not have said I was waiting, for a door to open and the right unlikely person to walk through it. Chapter 4. Keith, the man at the end of the road. By the time I met the woman who would save my life, I was, in plain truth, a man living a good deal closer to the end of his road than anyone around me wanted to admit. including me, and I will lay that out without performing it. Because the love story does not make sense unless you understand the shape of the man the love showed up to rescue. The band, by then, was the biggest thing of its kind in the world, and I was inside it the way you are inside weather, with no real way to step out and look at it. We had become enormous, and the enormity does a thing to a person that nobody warns you about. You are surrounded every minute by people, and you can still be the loneliest man alive, because everyone around you needs something, and the needing, even when it comes wrapped in love, is a weight that never sets down. I had the whole world and a hole in the middle of me, and I did what a certain kind of man does with a hole at the core of him, which is try to fill it with the loudest, fastest, most dangerous things he can lay his hands on. I am not going to glamorize the storm I lived in. I have watched the world romanticize it for 50 years, and it has always made me tired, because there was nothing romantic in it. There was only a man trying not to feel the hole, and very nearly succeeding, which is the most dangerous success there is. What I can tell you is the loneliness, because the loneliness is the part that matters, the part the love answered. I would come off a stage having held 100,000 strangers in the palm of my hand, the roar still ringing in my ears, the most adored man in any city we landed in, and I would end up in the small grim hours alone, genuinely alone, in the way that has nothing to do with how many people are in the room. The adoration of strangers, I learned, is a sea you can drown in just as easily as drink from. It does not love you back. It cannot. It does not know you. It knows the legend, the riff, the swagger, the indestructible cartoon. And the more they loved the cartoon, the more invisible the actual man became, until I was the most famous person in the building, and nobody in it knew me at all. That is a particular kind of cold. I had been cold like that for years, and had stopped expecting to be anything else. The thing nobody believes about that life is how much of it is spent waiting in rooms. The stage is 2 hours, the day is 24, and the 22 hours that are not the stage are where a man actually lives or fails to, and I was failing to, quietly, in hotel rooms, in cities I would not have found on a map. The curtains drawn against an afternoon I had no use for, the telephone unplugged, the world held at arm's length, because the world only wanted the cartoon, and I was too tired to keep drawing him. I told myself it was freedom, the not caring, the living like a man who had read his own ending and found it dull. It was not freedom. Freedom is having somewhere you want to be. I had nowhere I wanted to be, which is the opposite of free. It is just a cage with the door left open and a man inside too far gone to notice. I had every door in the world standing open, and I sat in the dark anyway, because an open door only helps a man who can still picture something on the other side worth walking toward, and I had stopped being able to picture anything at all. I want to say the true thing here, the thing underneath all the noise, because it is the hinge the whole rest of my life swings on. I did not think I was going to live very long, and the part I am least proud of is that for a long time I did not especially care. When a man stops minding whether he lives, he will do anything, and I did most of it. The people who loved me watched it and could not stop it, because you cannot save a man who has quietly decided he is not worth saving no matter how you love him. That is the iron law of it. The saving has to start on the inside, and the inside of me had gone dark, and I had made a sort of grim peace with the dark, and I was a legend the whole world envied who would not, in his most honest hour, have traded places with any happy ordinary nobody, because the ordinary nobody had the one thing I had thrown away, which was a reason to want tomorrow. If you had told me in those years that the cure for all of it would turn out to be an island girl from New York Harbor and a cold cup of tea forgotten on a kitchen counter, I would have laughed dryly and gone back to sitting in the dark. And then, into the brightest, loudest, most dangerous room of that whole dangerous era. On a night I was not looking for anything, because I had stopped believing there was anything left to look for, walked a Staten Island girl with the whole quiet harbor still in her. I did not yet understand, looking up, that the door had just opened. I had no idea that the woman crossing the room was carrying, in her pocket, the exact thing I had been missing for so long. I had forgotten. It had a name. I only knew that something in the room had changed, that for the first time in a long time, I wanted to stand up and cross a floor toward another human being, and that the wanting itself, after years of wanting nothing, was so strange and so strong that I got up, the indestructible legend, the man at the end of his road, and I walked toward her like a man walking toward the first warm thing he has seen in a very cold year. Part 2. The Birthday. Chapter 5. Patti, the night the pirate turned out to be gentle. I have been asked about the night I met him more times than I could count, and people always lean in expecting something cinematic, lightning and orchestras. And I always have to tell them the truth, which is both smaller and stranger than the legend wants it to be. We met in 1979, in the loudest, brightest room of that whole loud, bright era, the kind of place where the most famous people in the world went to be dangerous together. And into all that noise came the most famous, dangerous one of them all. And I want to tell you what I actually saw, because it was not what I was supposed to see. Everybody had warned me about him. That is the first thing. He arrived inside a cloud of his own reputation. This man the whole world had decided was the most reckless creature alive, and a sensible island girl raised by a church-going mother was supposed to take one look and run the other way. I had heard all the stories. I knew exactly who I was being introduced to. And then I actually looked at him, looked past the cloud and the swagger and the legend everybody else was busy being terrified of, and what I saw stopped me, because it was not a monster at all. It was a tired man. Underneath all that noise was somebody lonely and watchful and far more gentle than the reputation could account for. Somebody who looked at me like I was a warm window in a cold street, and I am telling you, that look went straight past everything I had been warned about and landed on the island part of me, the part that knows a hungry person when she sees one. I want to be honest that I did not fall for the legend. The legend held no interest for me whatsoever. I had spent years in rooms full of legends and learned that the legend is the least real thing about a person, and usually the loneliest place they live. What got me was the gentleness, which nobody had mentioned, because the gentleness was not good copy. He said something so dry and unexpected early on that I laughed out loud over all that noise, and I watched the simple fact of a girl laughing at him instead of trembling land on him like warm water. He was funnier than I expected, and quieter than I expected, and underneath the famous danger there was this courtly, almost old-fashioned sweetness. A man who had clearly been raised by people who taught him manners, even if he had spent 20 years pretending otherwise. We talked. I do not even fully remember about what. I remember that the noise of the whole bright room seemed to drop away, and that I was not frightened of him for 1 second, which apparently made me unusual, and I think being unafraid of him was the most attractive thing I could possibly have done, because the poor man was so used to people being either terrified of him or trying to use him that a girl who simply was not impressed must have felt like a glass of cold water in the desert. There is a detail from early on that I have never forgotten, because it told me everything. We were somewhere loud, late, the kind of night that era specialized in, and at some point he got quiet, the way a person does when the performance runs out of fuel, and he looked around that glittering room full of the most famous people alive, and I watched him be completely alone in the middle of all of it. Nobody else saw it. They saw the legend holding court. I saw a man on an island of his own, surrounded by people who would have stepped over him to get to the cartoon, and something in me, the island in me, the part raised to spot the person at the party who is not really at the party, went straight toward him. I did not think, here is a famous man. I thought, here is somebody who has not been fed in a long time, and I do not mean food. I come from people who can sense a hungry person across a crowded room and start fixing a plate before anyone says a word, and that instinct, older than I am, recognized him before my sensible mind had agreed to anything at all. My family, when they found out, had opinions. Of course they did. A big, loud Staten Island Lutheran family does not greet the news that their girl has taken up with the most notorious man in rock and roll by throwing a parade. My mother prayed about it, out loud, in front of me, which was her way. But here's the thing about my people, and it is the thing that mattered most in the whole story. They did not judge the cloud. They waited to meet the man. We were raised to set a place at the table for whoever showed up and find out who they actually were before we decided anything. And that island fairness, that refusal to convict a person on his reputation, proved to be the exact grace this particular wrecked and watchful man had been starving for his whole life without knowing it. I did not know that first night that I had just met my whole future. I did not let myself think anything that large. I knew only that I had looked straight at the man the whole world was afraid of and seen, plain as the harbor lights, a lonely person who needed a place to stand, and that something in me, some island instinct older than I am, had already quietly started setting him a place at the table before my sensible mind had agreed to any such thing. Chapter 6. Keith, the Staten Island table that tamed me. Let me tell you about the most frightening thing I have ever done, and I have done, by any reasonable accounting, a number of frightening things in my life, and not one of them put the fear in me the way this one did. I am talking about the day Patti took me home to meet her family on Staten Island, and I, a man the entire world believed feared nothing, was so nervous I could barely hold a teacup. You have to understand what I was walking into. Here was a big, loud, church-going working-class family, 6 kids, and a mother who prayed about things out loud, the most respectable, grounded, ordinary in the best sense people you could imagine. And into the middle of their Sunday, they were about to receive me, the human cautionary tale, the man their daughter had been warned about by every newspaper on earth. I had stood in front of 100,000 roaring strangers without my pulse changing. I sat in a car outside that modest Staten Island house with my heart going like a kick drum, terrified of a Lutheran mother and a table full of in-laws, and Patti looked over at me, delighted, and I will never forget it, because she saw straight through to how scared I was, and she found it the funniest and most reassuring thing in the world. The most dangerous man in rock and roll, she has said ever since, completely undone by the prospect of Sunday dinner. She tells that story at every opportunity. I let her, because it is true, and because the terror was the beginning of being saved. Here is what happened at that table, and it changed my life. They fed me. That is the whole miracle of it, told plain. This family that had every reason to slam the door in my face instead pulled up a chair, stretched the table with a leaf the way they did for anybody, put a full plate in front of me and treated me. The legend, the wreck, the cloud, like a person. Just a person. A young man their girl had brought home to be looked over and fed and folded in. Nobody at that table cared one bit about the riffs or the records or the danger. They wanted to know, was I good to Patti? Did I have manners? Would I bow my head when grace was said? And I did, and I meant it, the bowed head, more than I had meant anything in years. I had been adored by the entire world and starved the whole time. And a Staten Island family handed me a plate of ordinary food and a seat at an ordinary table. And I nearly came apart, because it was the first time in a long time anybody had looked at me and seen a man worth feeding, rather than a legend worth using. I remember the particular details of that first table, the way you remember the details of the day your life changed, because that is what it was. I remember the bowed heads for grace, and how long it had been since I had bowed mine and meant it. I remember the food coming around and around, more than anyone needed, the Staten Island theology of plenty made edible. Pass it again. Have some more. You are too thin. I remember a grandmother or an aunt asking me a plain question about myself. Not about the band, not about the records, about me. Was I sleeping enough? Did I have people who looked after me? And I remember being so unprepared for ordinary human concern that I nearly could not answer. The world had been screaming my name for 20 years, and not one of those voices had asked whether I was sleeping. A loud Lutheran family on Staten Island asked me at their first dinner, and meant it, and I understood sitting there with a fork in my hand that I had been starving in plain sight for 2 decades and had only just now been handed a plate. And they made fun of me, which is how I knew it was real. You do not tease a guest, you tease family. They got the measure of me fast, this funny, sharp, loving tribe. And they figured out within about one dinner that the famous wreck every newspaper had warned them about was, in a domestic setting, hopeless. A man who could command a stadium and could not be trusted to carry a dish from the kitchen table to the kitchen sink without incident. A hopelessness the whole crowded table found hilarious. And they started in on me, gently, the way that family teases everybody it has decided to keep, and being teased at that table was the warmest thing that had happened to me in a decade. I was being domesticated, right there, over a Sunday roast, and I felt it happening, and the legendarily reckless part of me that should have bolted for the door instead pulled the chair in closer and asked, "Please, could I have some more?" That is the day I started to want to live, if you want to know the truth of it. And I have not told it quite this plainly before. Not the night we met, glamorous as that makes the story. It was the Sunday table. It was being fed by people who did not need anything from me, being folded into a big, ordinary, loving family that had decided, against all the evidence the world had handed them, to give me a seat. I had spent years certain I was not worth saving. You cannot argue a man out of that, but you can, it turns out, feed him out of it, slowly, one Sunday at a time, until the dark thing at the center of him gets quietly outvoted by a table full of people passing him the potatoes. Surviving was the easy part. I had always known how to survive. What that Staten Island table taught me, the hard and holy thing, was that there was something beyond mere survival worth staying for, and that it looked exactly like an ordinary family dinner, and that impossibly, they were saving me a seat. Chapter 7. Patti, choosing the man under the cloud. There came a point, fairly early, when I had to make an actual decision about this man, and that decision is worth sitting with, because it was not the easy swoon people imagine. Loving Keith Richards in those years was not a thing you fell into. It was a thing you chose, with your eyes open, knowing exactly what the odds were, and I chose it. And here is why a sensible island girl with a praying mother looked at all the warning signs and decided to stay anyway. I was not naive. Let me say that as plainly as I can, because the version of this story where I did not understand what I was getting into is an insult to me. I understood completely. I knew the storm he had been living in. I could see, clearer than anyone, how close to the edge he had been running, because I was the one who got to see him, with the noise turned off, the tired private man behind the indestructible cartoon. And I knew that loving him meant loving someone who had a real and frightening fight in front of him, a lesser love, or a younger one, or a more selfish one, would have run and would have been right to, by every sensible measure I was raised with. I did not run, and let me be honest, that it was not because I was brave or because I thought I could fix him, because you cannot fix a person, and any woman who tries learns that the hard way. I stayed because I saw who he actually was under the wreckage, and who he actually was worth it. Here is what I saw, the thing the world could not see for the cloud. I saw a profoundly loyal man. I saw a man with old-fashioned manners and a tender streak a mile wide. A man who, once he loved you with a fierceness and a constancy that most people never get to receive in their whole lives. I saw that the same stubbornness that had let him survive everything was, if it ever got pointed in the right direction, going to make him the most faithful, most rooted, most permanent partner a woman could ask for. Because a man who refuses to die is a man who, once he decides to stay, will simply never leave. The danger and the devotion were the same muscle. I just had to wait and love him and keep the porch light on while he decided which direction to aim it. So I did not deliver ultimatums, and I did not nag, and I did not try to reform him like a project, because I had watched that approach fail for other women, and I knew it for the trap it is. I did something quieter, and I think much harder. I simply held the door open to the ordinary life, steadily, without pushing, and I let him see it, the warm island life, the Sunday tables and the harbor, and the possibility of being known instead of adored, and I trusted that a person who had been that hungry for that long would, if I just kept the light on, eventually walk toward it under his own power. You cannot drag a person into wanting to live, but you can stand in the lit doorway being everything he is hungry for, and you can wait. And that is what I did, and it is the bravest and most patient thing I have ever done in my life. I could not have told you how long it would take, or even for certain that it would work, and I will not pretend. There were not nights I was afraid I had bet my whole heart on a man the world was determined to take from me. But I had made my choice, clear-eyed, island stubborn, and I do not make a choice like that and then keep relitigating it. People who have never loved someone through a hard season think love is mostly feeling, and it is not. It is mostly decision, made again and again on the days the feeling is thin. I decided. I want to be clear that it was a decision and not a swoon, because the swoon would not have survived what we had to survive, and the decision did. There were nights I lay awake doing the cold arithmetic of it, the odds, the warnings, the very real possibility that I was going to lose this man, no matter how I loved him, And on those nights, the feeling was not soft and romantic at all. It was fear, plain fear. And I decided anyway, because I had looked under the cloud and seen who he was. And you do not unsee a thing like that. And you do not walk away from it just because loving it is going to cost you. I used to joke dryly to my sisters that I had fallen for the one man in America who needed a harbor more than a wife, and they did not find it funny, and on the thin nights neither did I. My mother used to say that you find out what love is worth on the days it is hardest to give, and I was raised to give it anyway, to set the plate anyway, to keep the light on anyway. And so I did, through the worst of it, on faith and island stubbornness, and very little else. I had set him a place at my table. I was going to keep it set, through the storm, through the fear, through all of it, until the day he finally chose to sit down in it and stay. Surviving I could not do for him, but staying the harder thing. I could make a home worth staying for. And I built that home with both hands and waited for the man I loved to come live in it. Chapter 8. Keith, the day I decided to want tomorrow. I am going to tell you about the most important decision I ever made, and it did not happen on a stage, and it was not in any newspaper, and it was the one decision in my whole loud life that I am genuinely, all the way proud of. I decided to live. I decided I wanted tomorrow, and I made that decision for one reason, with one name, and the name is Patti. For most of my life up to that point, as I have told you, I had been a man who did not particularly mind whether he saw the morning, and a man like that is, in the deepest sense, already gone, just waiting for the body to catch up to the surrender. And then this island girl walked into my life with her harbor, and her loud, loving family, and her steady, lit doorway, and a thing happened that had not happened in years, and that I had assumed could not happen to me anymore. I started to want things, small things at first, ordinary things, the kind of things I had spent 2 decades being far too dangerous to admit I wanted. I wanted to see her on a Sunday. I wanted to sit at that crowded table again. I wanted, absurdly, the ordinary troubles of a settled man, to burn the toast, to leave a coffee mug going cold, to be teased about it at the kitchen table. I wanted, God help me, a future, a thing I had treated as a sucker's bet my whole life, and now suddenly there was a tomorrow I actually wanted to be alive for, because she was going to be in it. That is the engine of the whole change, and I want to be very clear about how it works, because people get it backwards. Patti did not save me. I have said she did, plenty of times, because it is shorthand for the truth, and it fits on a magazine page. But the precise truth is more important than the shorthand. What she did was give me, for the first time in a long time, something I wanted to be alive for. And then she stood in the doorway being it, patiently, while I did the actual saving myself. Nobody can save you, that is the law. But somebody can love you so steadily and hold open such a warm, specific future that you finally want to be the kind of man who gets to live in it, and the wanting is the thing that does the saving. She handed me a reason. I had to do the rest, and it was the hardest work of my life, and I would do it 10 times over, because the prize was her, and the ordinary life, and 40 more years I had been about to throw in the bin. I want to honor how hard that work was without performing it, because the people who romanticize the wreckage also love to romanticize the recovery, and both are lies. It was not a montage. It was the grinding, unglamorous, day-by-day labor of a stubborn man learning to point his stubbornness toward staying alive instead of toward the opposite. And the only thing that got me through it was the lit doorway, and the woman standing in it, and the loud island family who had inexplicably decided to keep me. I leaned on all of it. I am not ashamed to say I leaned on it with my whole weight. A man does not climb out of a hole that deep on pride. He climbs out on the people who keep showing up at the edge of it with a hand and a plate, and Patti and her people never once stopped showing up, and that is the entire reason I am here to tell you about it. I want to say one true thing about how change actually happens, because the films get it wrong, and the wrongness does real harm. There is no single morning when the clouds part and a man is made new. That is a story we tell because it is tidier than the truth, and the truth is that change is 1,000 ordinary mornings, each one a small, unglamorous choice to point yourself toward the life instead of away from it. And most of them do not feel like victory at all. They feel like simply getting through the day without going backward. What kept me pointed the right way across all those grinding ordinary mornings was not willpower, because I have never had much. It was that there was a face I wanted to see when the day was done, and a table I wanted to be welcome at, and a future with her name on it that I was not willing to forfeit. The wanting did the work that willpower could not. A man will white-knuckle nothing for very long. But a man who has finally been given something he genuinely wants to stay alive for will, it turns out, find reserves he never knew he had, and she was the something. And the wanting of her walked me up out of the dark one ordinary stubborn morning at a time. And when I was finally ready, when I had done enough of the work to believe I might actually get to keep her, I did the only thing a man like me knows how to do with the most important moment of his life, which is to make it about a day that already meant something. We were down in Cabo San Lucas, in Mexico, and I asked her to marry me, and we set the wedding for the 18th of December, which is my birthday. People think that was vanity, marrying her on my own birthday, and they could not be more wrong. I did it because that December date had been, for 40 years, just the day I happened to be born. The day the indestructible cartoon got a year older, and I wanted to take that day and make it mean the only thing in my life that had ever mattered more than the music. I did not want a birthday anymore. I wanted an anniversary. I wanted, from that day forward, for the day I came into the world to be the same day I started my real life, so that I could never again have one without the other, so that every year I got older would also be a year I got to stay married to her. I was turning 40. I had not expected to see 40, and I decided to spend the birthday I never thought I would reach marrying the woman who was the reason I had reached it. That is not vanity. That is a man burying his old self and his old day under a new and better one. On purpose, in the sun, on a beach in Mexico, with the only future he had ever wanted standing in front of him, saying yes. Part 3. The Birthday Wedding. Chapter 9. Patti married on a beach in the sun. On the 18th of December, 1983, I married him on a beach in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, on his 40th birthday, and that day is the one I would relive over any other, because everything I had chosen and waited for and bet my whole heart on came true in the sun that afternoon, and I have never once regretted a single grain of that sand. I understood the gift he was giving me by marrying me on his birthday, and it undid me, because I knew this man. I knew exactly what that day had been to him for 40 years. It had been the day the legend was born, the day the world celebrated the indestructible cartoon, and he was handing it to me, deliberately, saying from now on, this is not the day I was born. This is the day we began. He was taking the one day that had always belonged to his old wild self and giving it to us, so that he could never again grow a year older without it being our anniversary, so that the math of his own life would be permanently tangled up with the math of our marriage. A woman knows when a man has thought of the most meaningful possible thing he could do, and then done it. I am not a person who is easily swept off her feet. I was raised practical, on an island, by people who did not trust grand gestures. And this grand gesture broke me wide open, because it was not a performance. It was a vow disguised as a date, the most permanent kind of promise a man like him could make. There was sand in everything that day, in the cake, in my shoes, very nearly in the vows, and we laughed about it for years afterward, the grandest afternoon of our lives, held together with sunscreen and good humor. The wedding itself was sun and sand, and not many people, which suited us both, the two of us who had spent our whole working lives in front of crowds, finally doing the most important thing in private. I stood on that beach, and I looked at this man I had chosen with my eyes wide open, this survivor, this gentle, dangerous, tender wreck I had loved through the storm and into the light, and I thought about my mother praying over the news of him, and my big, loud family stretching the table to feed him, and all the warnings I had ignored, and I knew, the way you know the color of the water, that I had been right. Everybody had told me to run. I had stayed. And here he was, alive, on a beach, on the birthday he never thought he would see, marrying me. And the staying had been the truest thing I ever did. I keep, in the part of my memory I do not show to anybody, the small physical details of that afternoon, the things that have nothing to do with anybody's idea of a celebrity wedding. The warmth of the sand through the soles of my feet, the particular way the light comes off the water down there in the late part of the day, gone gold and soft. The sound his voice made saying the words, a voice the whole world knew from records, and had never once heard say a thing this tender and this plain. I had spent years being photographed, my face arranged and lit and printed for millions of strangers, and not one of those millions of images held a candle to the unphotographed truth of that afternoon. A man and a woman on a beach saying the oldest words there are and meaning every one. The cameras had wanted the printed Patti her whole life. The man on that beach wanted the real one, the island one, the whole one, and I gave her to him gladly and got back the only thing I had ever wanted more than I wanted to admit, which was to be loved all the way down by somebody who knew exactly who I was. I cried, the good kind, the kind that comes when a thing you were afraid to hope for arrives anyway. I had spent years being the steady one, the one who kept the light on and waited and did not push. And there is a particular exhaustion in patient love that nobody talks about, the long, quiet labor of holding a door open for someone who has not yet decided to walk through it. And on that beach, the labor paid off all at once. The door was not just open anymore. He had walked through it and turned around and was promising to live inside it with me for the rest of our lives. The waiting was over. The choosing was done. The man under the cloud had stepped all the way out into the sun and married the island girl who had seen him the whole time. I did not know, standing on that beach in the sun, exactly how much ordinary life was waiting beyond that vow. The daughters and the decades, and the quiet book-filled house, the cold cups of tea and the blankets pulled over a sleeping man, the 40-some years of staying that the wedding only opened the door to. I knew only that I had married my own true person on the most meaningful day he could find, that the survivor had chosen to stay, and that the harbor I had carried in my pocket since I was a child on the ferry had finally, after all the bright, loud, dangerous years, found the one ship it had been waiting to bring safely home. Chapter 10. Keith, the anniversary I gave my own birthday to. I have been alive a long time now, longer than the bookmakers ever would have given you odds on, and of all the days in all those years, the one I would live over and over if I could is the 18th of December, 1983, on that Mexican beach, marrying Patti on the 40th birthday I never thought I would reach. What that day did inside me is the thing I most need understood, because it is the day the whole rest of my life turned on its hinge. I told you I gave her my birthday on purpose, and I want to explain what that purpose really was, since it is the closest thing I have to a philosophy of how a wrecked man rebuilds himself. My birthday had always belonged to the old me, the dangerous one, the cartoon, the man who was famous for nearly dying and kept not quite managing it. I did not want that day anymore. I did not want to be that man anymore. And rather than simply walk away from the old self, which never works, a man cannot just abandon who he was, I did something better, I think. I took the old day and I built a new and better thing right on top of it. I made that date into our anniversary, so that the day I was born would forever be outranked in my own life by the day I started actually living. Every year since, when the world wants to wish the legend a happy birthday, the legend is somewhere quiet with his wife, celebrating the only thing that ever mattered more than the music. That was the design. Bury the old day under a better one, and let the better one win every single year, forever. And it worked, which still astonishes me. The marriage took. The survivor stayed. I will tell you how strange it was in the best way to go from a man who could not imagine wanting tomorrow to a man with an anniversary, with a date circled, with a future that had a shape. For 20 years I had lived like a man with no horizon, and now I had married one. I had a tomorrow with her name on it, and a next year, and a next, all of them stretching out ahead in a way that, for once in my adult life, did not frighten or bore me, but genuinely thrilled me, because she was going to be in all of them. People who have always wanted to live cannot understand what a miracle it is to suddenly want to, after years of not. It is like someone who has been colorblind his whole life, waking up one morning able to see the whole spectrum. The world I had been moving through grimly, just surviving, suddenly had a reason in it, and the reason was the island girl who had married me on the beach on my own birthday. And I have never gotten over my luck, not for one single day of the 40-some years since. There is a thing that happens to a man who marries a horizon, and I will set it down plainly, because nobody told me it was coming, and it might help somebody who is where I was. When you have lived a long time with no future you actually want, the days have a way of blurring into one long gray smear, because what gives a day its edges, its shape, its meaning, is that it is leading somewhere you care about getting to. Take away the somewhere, and the days stop counting. They just pass. I had spent 20 years letting days pass, uncounted, because they were not leading anywhere I wanted to go. And the strangest, sweetest discovery of married life was that the days came back into focus. Suddenly, there was a next anniversary to reach, a daughter's first step to be home for, a quiet Christmas in Connecticut worth staying alive to see, a chance to burn the holiday toast and be laughed at for it. And the future I had married pulled all my blurred gray days back into sharp, particular focus, each one leading toward her, toward the home, toward the next ordinary thing worth wanting. A man with a horizon counts his days again, because each one is a step toward something he loves. And I had been given a horizon with a harbor waiting in it. And I started at 40, counting my days for the first time since I was a boy. And I have been counting them gratefully ever since, all the way to this one. I should be plain that marrying her did not instantly fix everything, because nothing instantly fixes everything. And a love story that pretends otherwise is a lie that does damage to people living real lives. The work of becoming the man worth her staying was a long work, years of it, and I did it imperfectly, and she will tell you so, with love, and with the specific dry accuracy she has about my failings. But the vow on the beach was the turning point, the place where the whole direction of my life reversed, where a man who had been falling for 20 years finally caught hold of something and started, slowly, stubbornly, to climb. She was the handhold, the marriage was the rope. And I climbed, because for the first time there was something at the top worth climbing toward, and it was waiting for me with a harbor in its eyes, and a loud, loving island family standing behind it, and a future, an actual future, the thing I had thrown away and somehow, undeservedly, been handed back. Chapter 11. Patti, 2 daughters, and a quiet house. We had 2 daughters, and they remade me more completely than fame or marriage, or anything else ever did, and becoming a mother with this particular man is where the wild love story turned into the ordinary one, and the ordinary one is the one I am proudest of. Theodora came first, in March of 1985, and Alexandra came the next year, in the summer of 1986, 2 little girls born in New York to a supermodel and a Rolling Stone, which sounds, written down, like a recipe for chaos, and I was determined that it would be the opposite. I had grown up one of 6 at a loud, crowded island table, and I knew exactly what I wanted to give my own girls, which was not the glamour and not the noise, but the table itself, the ordinary, grounded, loving childhood I had been given, the Sunday dinners and the said grace, and the sense that home is the realest thing there is. So we made a quiet life, on purpose, away from the carnival. We built our family in Connecticut, in an old house, and I poured everything my island mother had poured into me into those 2 girls, the steadiness, the faith, the feeding, the unglamorous daily love that nobody photographs. Let me be straight about raising daughters with a man who toured the world for a living, and it was not always easy, and I promised you honesty. There were long stretches when he was gone, when the band was out across the world and I was home being both parents, and that is hard. I will not pretend it is not. The loneliness of holding a household together while the person you love is on the far side of the planet, doing the loud thing he was born to do. But here is what I want you to understand, because it is the heart of how we made it work. When he was home, all the way home. He was not a man who came back from tour and stayed half gone, distracted, still on the stage in his head. He walked in that door and became completely a father, present and tender and hands-on in a way that would shock anyone who only knew the cartoon. The man the world called indestructible changed diapers and read the bedtime story and sat on the floor of that Connecticut house, playing with his girls. He spilled the cereal and dropped the spoon and forgot the coffee mug going cold on the kitchen counter. And the girls thought he was hilarious. And I would stand in the doorway watching it and have to hold on to something, because the gap between what the world thought he was and what I knew he was had never been wider than in those moments on the floor with our daughters. I want to tell the truth about those young years, because a love story that skips the exhaustion is lying to every tired parent who reads it. There were seasons I was bone-tired in a way that does not photograph the particular depletion of holding a whole household and 2 small children steady while the person you love is on the far side of the planet doing the loud, necessary thing. The girls did not care that their father was famous. A baby with a fever at 2 a.m. does not know or care that there is a stadium somewhere chanting your husband's name. And the loneliness of those nights was real. The laundry never done. A child who lost a sock at the worst possible moment. And I will not pretend otherwise. But here is the thing I learned in the hard middle of it, the thing that held me together. He always came back. Every single time, no matter how far the road took him, the door opened and he was home, and home all the way, not half gone, not still on the stage in his head, but down on the floor with the girls inside an hour, magnificently useless at every practical task and completely present for every important one. A woman can carry a great deal of solitude if she knows for a certainty that the person will come home and be real when he gets there, and I knew it, and so I carried it, and the carrying built something between us stronger than easy years ever could have. I also want to say, because it matters, that I made a choice about my own bright, loud career in those years, and I made it gladly, and I would make it again. I stepped back from a great deal of the modeling world, the thing that had once been my whole identity, and I poured that same energy into the home, into the girls, into building the harbor, and people sometimes ask whether I regret it, the famous face who walked away from the cameras, and the answer is that I have never regretted it for one single second. The cameras wanted the printed me. My daughters wanted the real one, and so did my husband, and I would not trade one ordinary Connecticut morning with the people who wanted the real Patti for all the magazine covers in the world. I had been valued for my face long enough. In that house, I got to be valued for my whole self, and that was the better deal, and I knew it, and I took it with both hands. And the daughters got the real him, which is the greatest gift I think we gave them. They did not grow up with a legend for a father. They grew up with Keith, the man who could not work a single household appliance, who fell asleep mid-sentence in his reading chair, who would do anything on earth for them, and could not be trusted to remember where he had left his own glasses. They teased him mercilessly, the way my family had taught all of us to tease the people we love, and he took it the way he takes everything from the people he loves, grinning, delighted to be the family's favorite ridiculous person. The girls grew up knowing that the warmest, safest, funniest place in the world was an ordinary evening at home with their hopeless, devoted dad, and that is not a thing I take for granted, given who he had been and how close the world had come to taking him before they were ever born. I think often about how nearly none of this happened. I think about the wrecked man I met in that bright, loud room, and how close he came to never reaching 40, let alone to falling asleep in a reading chair in Connecticut, with a grandchild's drawing taped to the wall beside him. We built a whole ordinary, beautiful family in the space that the storm had nearly closed forever. And every Sunday dinner in that Connecticut house, every burnt around the edges holiday, every loud, crowded table I stretched with a leaf the way my mother taught me, was a small, quiet victory over the dark thing that had almost won. Surviving I could not do for him, but the staying, the ordinary daily staying, the 2 girls in the quiet house and the decades of dinners that we built together with both hands, and it held. Chapter 12. Keith, the father in the library, and the rule about the shepherd's pie. Let me tell you about the man I became inside that Connecticut house, because he is the man I am proudest of being, and almost nobody who has only seen me on a stage would recognize him. At home, I am, of all the unlikely things, a reader. I have built up over a lifetime a library that has gotten genuinely out of hand, books in every room, double-shelved, stacked on the stairs, left open spine up on every surface, and the great secret pleasure of my whole life is to sink into a deep chair amid all of it, late at night, with a cup of tea and a book, in a quiet house, with my family asleep upstairs, the most notorious wreck of his generation, reading history in his socks in the small dark hours. If the version of me from the storm years could see it, he would not believe his eyes, and I would not trade it for anything that man ever chased. People are always surprised by the books, and I have not ever quite understood why, because the same hunger that made me a musician made me a reader. They are the same appetite, really, the wanting to know how a thing is built, how a song holds together, how a war was lost, how a man lived and what it cost him. I read history mostly, great long accounts of how the world got to be the way it is, and I read late, after the house has gone quiet, which is the only hour a man like me is truly at peace. The work done, the family asleep, the lamp on, a book open, the whole roaring world finally switched off. I have lost whole nights this way, and counted them among the best of my life. There is a particular quiet in a house full of sleeping people you love, a quiet that has weight to it, a good weight, and to sit inside that quiet with a book and a cup of tea I will inevitably forget to finish is, for me, as close to church as I get. The boy from Dartford who could not sit still in any classroom turned into an old man who reads history till dawn in a quiet house, and the only thing that changed him was being given, at long last somewhere, he wanted to sit still. The library itself has become a sort of family joke, the way it has grown, the books colonizing room after room, stacked on the stairs so you have to step over them, double-shelved and then triple-stacked in front of the double shelves, until finding a particular volume is an archaeological dig. Patti has made her peace with it, the way she has made her peace with all my eccentricities, which is to say she gathers the cold teas, marks my page, and lets the books win, because she understood long ago that the library is not clutter. It is the visible shape of the inner life of the man she married, the proof that the wild boy grew into someone with a quiet, vast curiosity, and she would no more clear out my books than I would tune the 6th string back onto my guitar. She lets me be exactly who I turned out to be, in a house we built to hold it, and that permission, that being let to be yourself, is one of the truest forms of love I know. I have to confess my great ongoing domestic uselessness, because Patti would never forgive me if I left it out, and because it is the running joke of our entire marriage. I cannot do a single practical thing in a house. I am a man who has commanded stadiums on 6 continents, and I cannot reliably operate a kitchen appliance, cannot find my own glasses, which are usually on my head, cannot remember where I set the very cup of tea I poured 90 seconds ago, so that the house is dotted at all times with cold, half-drunk cups of tea, one on the kitchen counter, one on the kitchen window ledge, one abandoned on the breakfast table, marking my path through the day, like a trail of breadcrumbs. Patti follows behind me gathering them, shaking her head, and the gathering of my abandoned cold teas is one of the small daily liturgies of our marriage. Her quiet competence cleaning up after my magnificent helplessness, and we have both decided, after 40 years, that this is simply the deal, and it is a good deal, and I got much the better end of it. But I will tell you the one domestic matter on which I am not helpless, the one household law that bears my name, because it has become legend in its own right, and it is entirely true. There is a thing about me and shepherd's pie. I love it. I have always loved it, and somewhere along the decades, it became an absolute ironclad rule, observed by everyone who has ever worked with or lived near me, that you do not break the crust of the shepherd's pie before I have had the first serving. That pie is mine to open. The crust is mine to break. Whole tours have understood this. It is, I freely admit, an absurd thing for a grown man to be rigid about, a man who is relaxed about nearly everything else on earth. But every man is allowed one ceremony, and mine is the crust of the shepherd's pie, and my family has built an entire comedy routine around the gravity with which I defend it. They will pretend, at holidays, to reach for it early, just to watch me come up out of my reading chair, faster than the indestructible old wreck has any business moving, and the whole table howls, and I let them have the joke, because being teased at your own crowded table about your one ridiculous rule is, I have learned, the very sound of belonging. Here is the thing underneath the comedy, though, because there is always a real thing under the best jokes. The reason I love being the family's hopeless, tea-abandoning, pie-defending fool is that the home is the one place in my entire life where I do not have to be the legend. Out there, I am the indestructible cartoon, the riff, the swagger, a thing the whole world has an opinion about. In that house, in that library, at that crowded table, I am just Keith, who cannot find his glasses, who falls asleep in his chair, who is absurd about shepherd's pie, married to Patti, who gathers his cold teas and marks his page and loves him anyway. That is the prize. That was always the prize, though it took me half a wrecked life to understand it. The stages were never the point. The point was a quiet house full of books, and a woman who pulls a blanket over you when you fall asleep reading, and a family who teases you about a pie. I survived the loud, dangerous world, but I only started living the day I learned to sit still in a quiet, warm one. And Patti is the one who taught me how, and I have been her grateful, useless, devoted student in the school of staying for 40 years, and I have no intention of ever graduating. Part 4. The Marriage That Stayed. Chapter 13. Patti, the harbor I became. I told you at the start that I grew up carrying a harbor in my pocket. The island, the stone, the steady place I held on to while the bright world tried to convince me I was only a printed face. And I want to tell you what happened to that harbor over the decades of this marriage, because somewhere along the way, I stopped just carrying it and became it. For him, for our girls, for the whole loud, wonderful weather system of a family we built. And becoming the harbor is the work I am proudest of in my entire life. A marriage to a touring man is a particular kind of life, and I made my peace with its shape early. He would go out into the world and do the loud thing, the thing he was born for, and I would keep the home, the quiet thing, the realer thing, and he would come back to it every time, like a ship coming back to port. I did not resent that arrangement, though plenty of people assumed I must, because they did not understand that I had chosen it on purpose, that the home was not a consolation prize for the wife who stayed back. The home was the center of gravity of the entire family, the fixed point the whole loud life rotated around. He was the riff. I was the room the riff came home to, and a riff with nowhere to come home to is just noise, and we both knew it. And the knowing was the deal we built our 40 years on. The ordinary days are the part I treasure most. Looking back, and they were made almost entirely of small, unremarkable things. It was him asleep in his reading chair with a book sliding off his chest, and me marking his page and covering him up. It was the trail of cold abandoned teacups I followed through the house gathering, shaking my head, loving him. It was the absurd solemn ceremony of the shepherd's pie, and the girls pretending to break the crust just to watch their father leap. It was the back porch in the warm months, and the front porch light left burning for the girls when they were teenagers, and out too late. It was the two of us old now, sitting in a quiet room full of books, not needing to say much, having long ago worn our way past the place where two people have to fill the silence. None of it was glamorous. All of it was the marriage. I have come to believe that the realest love is not the dramatic kind at all. It is the harbor kind, the someone marks your page kind, the someone gathers your cold teas kind, and that the two of us spent 40 years quietly accumulating that ordinary intimacy until we had built, out of 10,000 small, unremarkable days, the single most solid thing in either of our lives. I want to say something about being the steady one, because it is not as passive as it sounds, and I do not want any young woman to hear my story and think the wife who keeps the home is the smaller half of the bargain. Keeping a harbor is hard, skilled, demanding work. Being the fixed point that a wild, brilliant, restless man can always come back to. The place that does not move no matter what storms he sails through. That takes a strength most people never see and never clap for. I held that house steady through every kind of weather. Through the years he was gone, and the years he was struggling, and the years we were just tired, and I held it on purpose, with my island spine, because I had decided long ago on a beach in the sun that I was in this for the staying, and the staying needed somebody to be the harbor, and I was built for it, and I am proud of it, and would not trade my quiet, steady half of this marriage for all the loud, famous halves in the world. I will tell you the small daily liturgy of being that harbor, because it is made of nothing anyone would put in a song. It is knowing how he takes his tea and making it anyway, knowing he will leave it to go cold somewhere, knowing I will find the cup later behind a stack of books and carry it to the kitchen sink without a word, because that is not a chore. That is a love letter written in the only alphabet a long marriage uses, the alphabet of small attended things. It is keeping the house quiet in the late morning, because he reads till dawn and sleeps past it. It is the particular way two people who have shared a kitchen for 40 years move around each other without colliding. A choreography nobody taught us, learned over decades, the way you learn a song until your hands know it without you. The romance people imagine is loud and rare. The romance I have lived is quiet and constant, 10,000 small acts of paying attention, and I have come to believe it is the realer of the two, because anybody can be swept away for a weekend. But only love that has decided to stay will mark a page and carry a cold cup to the sink for 40 years and call it a privilege. Chapter 14. Keith, 5 strings, and a place to come home to. People who know about my playing know that I do a strange thing with the guitar. A thing that is, now that I think about it, the truest description of my whole marriage I could give you, and it is worth laying out, because the longer I live, the more I think the secret of the music and the secret of the love were always the same secret. Here is the thing I do. On the guitar that made most of the songs you would know, I take a string off. I play with 5 strings instead of 6 in an old open tuning, and I tune the rest of them so they ring together as a chord on their own. Most players want more strings, more notes, more everything. I took one off, and I tuned what was left so it would harmonize with itself. And the whole sound I am known for, that big ringing open thing, comes out of that one decision to use less and to tune what remains so it holds together on its own. I spent years not realizing I had done the same thing with my life. I took off everything I did not need, the chaos, the storm, the loud, dangerous excess, the whole heavy sixth string of the wild years, and I tuned what was left, the home, the family, the quiet house, the woman, so that it would ring as a chord. Less, tuned right, holds better than more. That is the secret of the guitar, and it is the secret of the marriage, and I am a slow enough man that it took me half a lifetime to notice they were the same secret. I kept touring, all through the decades, long past the age when the bookmakers said I would be doing anything at all, let alone playing stadiums. The loud life never fully stopped, and I never wanted it to, because the music is the other true thing in me, the thing that was there before Patti, and would have been there if I had never been lucky enough to meet her. But everything changed about what the touring meant. Once there was a harbor to come home to. In the storm years, the road had been a place to disappear into, a way of never having to stop and feel the hole at the heart of me. After Patti, the road became something else entirely. It became the loud thing I did between the times that mattered, the noise I made out in the world before coming home to the quiet that was the actual point. I would play to 100,000 roaring strangers, the old electric glory of it, and then I would get on a plane and fly back to an old house in Connecticut and a woman in her socks and a cup of tea I would inevitably abandon half finished. And here is a truth no young wild man would have believed, which is that the coming home was always better than the roar. The roar is wonderful. The roar does not know you. The woman in the socks knows you all the way down, and there is no stadium on earth that can compete with being known. I have thought a great deal over the decades about the difference between being adored and being known, because I have had an unusually large amount of the first, and I nearly died for lack of the second. Adoration comes from people who have never met you, for a version of you that does not exist, and it pours in by the thousand and it warms nothing, because you cannot be warmed by the love of someone who does not know you, any more than you can be fed by a photograph of a meal. Being known is the opposite of all that. Being known is one person in a quiet room who has seen you at your worst and your most ridiculous and your most afraid, who knows that you cannot find your own glasses and that you read till dawn because the dark used to frighten you, who has watched you fail and stayed, and who loves not the cartoon, but the actual flawed, specific man. Adoration is a flood you can drown in. Being known is a hand that pulls you out of the flood. I had oceans of the first and was starving, and then an island girl gave me the second, just one woman in a still house who actually knew me. And it turned out that one person who truly knows you is worth more than all the strangers in all the stadiums in the world, and I would not trade her knowing of me for every screaming arena I ever filled. The funny thing, the thing the young version of me could never have believed, is that the home did not shrink the music, it saved it. I half expected, when I finally let myself be domesticated, that the songs would dry up, that a contented man would have nothing left to say, because the legend insists that art has to come from the storm. The legend is wrong. The storm nearly killed the art along with the man, because a corpse writes nothing. It was the harbor that let me keep playing into an age nobody thought I would reach, the steady home that let me go out and make the loud, joyful noise for decades more, because I had somewhere to come back to and somebody to come back for, and a man with a reason to come home is a man who can keep going out a great deal longer than a man with nothing waiting. The quiet thing did not end the loud thing. The quiet thing is the only reason the loud thing lasted. I've watched a lot of men in my line of work get the loud thing and never get the quiet thing. And I have watched what it does to them. And that is the saddest thing I know. They have the adoration of millions and the love of no one, the roar, and no room to come home to. All 6 strings screaming and nothing tuned to hold together. And they cannot understand why the enormous public life feels so hollow at the center. And I could tell them, but they would not hear it, because I would not have heard it either at their age. The answer is that the roar was never going to fill the hole. Only the quiet thing fills the hole. Only a harbor fills the hole. I got unspeakably lucky. A wrecked man at the end of his road who happened to walk into the one bright room on the one night that a girl from the harbor with an island in her pocket was crossing it. And I have spent 40 years tuning my whole life around her like 5 strings, ringing as a chord, and the sound it makes, the sound of a loud man with a quiet home, is the best thing I have ever played. Chapter 15. Patti, the hard season. Let me tell you about a frightening time, because a love story that only shows you the sunlit beach and skips the hard seasons is not a love story at all. It is an advertisement, and I promised you the real thing. There came a year when I got sick, genuinely sick, the serious kind, the kind that sits you down and makes you count what matters, and how this marriage carried me through it is the part that most belongs in a love story, because the carrying is where you find out what 40 years was actually for. I will speak about the illness the way I have always chosen to speak about it, in my own words and on my own terms, because it is my body and my story, and I have never let it be anybody's headline. I faced a cancer. I will say that plainly, because there is no shame in it, and because hiding it would dishonor every other woman who has sat where I sat. It was a hard road and a scary one, and I am here, all these years later, telling you about it from the far side, which is its own kind of grace, and not one I take for granted. But this is not a book about the illness. This is a book about a marriage. And what I want to tell you is what the marriage did while I was frightened, because that is the part that belongs in a love story. He showed up. That is the entire thing, told plain, and it is everything. The man the world believed was too wild and too selfish and too far gone to ever be anybody's steady rock, the cartoon, the legend, the wreck, sat by me through the worst of it and did not flinch and did not leave and did not for 1 second make me feel like a burden. The harbor I had been for him for all those decades, the steady place he came home to through every storm, turned around in the hard season and became a harbor for me. And I learned, lying there frightened, that the staying I had given him all those years was not a gift that only went one direction. He had learned it. He had learned to stay. The man who had spent his youth unable to sit still in a quiet room sat still beside my bed for as long as it took. And I understood that all those years of teaching him the harder magic of staying had taken root, and that when I finally needed him to be the steady one, he was, completely, without being asked. There is a particular fear that comes with that kind of illness, and it is not only the fear of the thing itself, it is the fear of becoming a burden, of watching love curdle into duty, of seeing the person you adore start to look at you as a problem, to be managed rather than a partner to be loved. I had seen it happen to other couples, and I dreaded it more than I dreaded the treatment. and it never came. That is what I most want to say about that frightening year. He never once, by so much as a flicker, made me feel like the weather had changed, like I had become less than I was, like the loving had turned into the looking after. He was simply there, steady and unbothered and a little funny, even in the grim rooms, cracking some dry, ridiculous joke about the vending machine coffee cup that made me laugh when I had no business laughing, treating me exactly as he always had, which when you are frightened and diminished is the greatest gift a person can give you, the gift of being treated like yourself when you no longer feel like yourself. I had spent 40 years being his harbor, and I learned that year that the harbor had been built in both directions all along, and that the man I had taught to stay had learned the lesson so thoroughly that he could now hold me steady through the roughest water I had ever known, without being asked, without complaint, without ever once letting me see anything in his face but love. That is the thing about a marriage that goes the distance. You do not actually know in the sunny years whether the foundation will hold, because the sunny years do not test it. You find out in the hard season. You find out at 2 a.m. in a frightening room when one of you is scared and the other one simply does not leave. We found out. I found out that the wild man I had bet my whole heart on 40 years before had become, when it counted most, the most reliable presence in my life. And he found out, I think, the same thing he had been finding out since that first Staten Island Sunday dinner, that there is something past survival worth staying for, and that staying, even when staying is hard and frightening and unglamorous, is the truest thing love ever does. We had both spent our marriage learning that surviving was the easy part and staying was the whole art. The hard season was our final exam in it, and we passed it the only way that counts, by being there, by not leaving, by holding the harbor steady for each other when the water got rough. Chapter 16. Keith, honest about how close it was. I am an old man now, with the whole long shape of my life laid out behind me where I can finally see it, and I will be honest, all the way honest, about how close I came to never having any of this, because the gratitude does not make sense unless you understand the size of what I nearly threw away. I have told you, without performing it, that there were years I did not expect or much want to live, and I will sit with that for a moment from where I am now, because the distance between that man and this one is the whole miracle I need you to feel. That man, the one with no horizon left in front of him, was certain he had already had the best of it, that the loud, bright, dangerous years were the peak, and there was nothing left but the long slide down. He was wrong about everything. The best of it had not happened yet. The best of it was a harbor girl he had not met, and 2 daughters who were not born, and a quiet, book-crowded house in Connecticut that did not exist, and 40-some years of ordinary mornings and cold abandoned teacups, and a ridiculous rule about a shepherd's pie. The man at the end of his road thought the story was over. The story had not started, and he came within a hair, more than once, of dying with the whole real story still ahead of him, unlived, unknown, lost forever in the storm. I think about that man, my own younger self, with a complicated tenderness, the way you think about someone you loved who was drowning and could not see the shore. I am not ashamed of him exactly, but I grieve for how close he came to robbing me of all of this. And I want anyone who is in their own storm right now, anyone who has quietly decided they are not worth saving, to hear the one thing I know for certain from the other side of it. You cannot see from inside the storm the life that is waiting for you on the other side. It is invisible from in there. The man lost in the storm could not have imagined this quiet house, could not have pictured the woman marking his page, could not have conceived that the best 4 decades of his life were still in front of him, because the storm hides all of that. The storm tells you there is nothing left, and the storm is lying. There was everything left. There was the whole real life, still to come. I have watched over my long life too many of my own kind go the other way, the ones who had the same storm I had, and no harbor waiting on the far side of it, and I grieve every one of them, because the only real difference between their endings and mine was luck and one island girl. I am not a man who believes he earned his rescue by being better than the ones who did not get one. I was not better. I was luckier. I happened to walk into the one room on the one night that the right person was crossing it, and she happened to look past the cloud, and her family happened to be the kind that feeds a stranger instead of judging him. And any one of those things going differently, and I am a cautionary tale instead of an old man in a reading chair. So I hold my rescue gently and without pride, the way you hold anything you know you did not entirely deserve. And I have spent the back half of my life trying to be worthy after the fact of a gift I was handed before I had done a thing to earn it. That is what gratitude actually is, I have decided. It is not a feeling. It is a way of living that tries, every ordinary day, to deserve in arrears the thing that saved you. She is the love of my life. I have said it plainly and publicly, and I will say it again here. Because at my age, you stop being shy about the only things that turned out to matter. Patti is the love of my life, the reason I am alive to be anybody's love at all. The woman who walked into the brightest, loudest room of the most dangerous era and saw, under the cloud, a tired man worth feeding, and then spent 40 years feeding him, marking his page, gathering his cold teas, holding the harbor steady through every weather. I did the climbing myself, that is true. Nobody can climb out of that hole for you. But she is the one who stood in the lit doorway, being everything I was hungry for, patient and steady and unafraid, until a wrecked man found a reason to want tomorrow. I owe her the tomorrows. I owe her all of them. 40-some years of tomorrows I was about to throw in the bin, and she handed them back to me one ordinary morning at a time. And the only way I have ever found to thank her is to keep choosing to stay every single day in the quiet house with the books and the tea and the woman who saved my life by simply refusing to give up on the man under the cloud. Chapter 17. Patti. 40 years, and the table still set. We passed our 40th anniversary not long ago, and I turned 70 this past spring, and our girls are grown women now with lives of their own, and I have been thinking about what all those years actually add up to, because the number is easy to say and impossible to understand from the outside, and I will try to tell you what 4 decades of marriage feel like from the inside. 40 years is a great many ordinary days. That is the first true thing about it, and the most surprising one. People imagine a long marriage to a famous man as some kind of highlight reel, the beaches and the stages and the glamour strung together. And that is not what it is at all, not even slightly. A long marriage is mostly ordinary days, thousands upon thousands of them. The morning tea and the gathered cold cups and the books left open and the who is cooking tonight. The small, steady negotiations of 2 lives sharing one old, creaky house. The grand moments are real, but they are rare. The marriage is not the grand moments. The marriage is the ordinary days, and the secret nobody tells you is that if you have married the right person and waited for him under the cloud and built a harbor he could come home to, the ordinary days are the very best part. I do not light up because of the fame or the beaches. I light up because of an ordinary Tuesday in our Connecticut kitchen, the tea going cold on the kitchen counter, the cereal bowls still in the kitchen sink, the books everywhere, the man I have loved for 40-some years asleep in his chair, where I will go and mark his page in a minute. Our daughters grew up and became their own remarkable selves, and watching them step out into the world was its own deep joy. The proof that the quiet, grounded childhood we built in that old house had done its work. They grew up in front of cameras some of the time, the way children of famous parents do. But underneath it, they grew up at a stretched Sunday table with a mother who fed them and a father who could not find his glasses. And that ordinary foundation is the thing I am most proud of having given them. The same harbor my own island mother gave me, passed down one more generation. The table I learned to set as a girl on Staten Island, I set for 40 years in Connecticut, and my girls watch me set it, and they know how now, and that is how a family hands love down, one set table at a time, generation after generation, and it does not photograph, and it does not make headlines, and it is the only thing that has ever truly mattered. I turned 70 this past spring, and my family made a fuss of it. The good kind, the whole loud, loving tribe of us, gathered the way my own childhood gathered. Too many people elbow to elbow, and not enough chairs and far too much food. The Staten Island theology of plenty carried all the way across my whole life and set down on a Connecticut table. And I sat there, 70 years old, the island girl who became a cover girl, who became a wife and a mother, and now a grandmother, surrounded by the family I had built in the space the storm once nearly closed forever. And I looked down the table at the man I had been warned away from 47 years ago, older now, grayer, still unable to find his glasses, still ridiculous about his shepherd's pie, still the love of my whole life. And I had to blink hard and blame it on something other than what it was. Because here is what 70 years teaches you. The thing the young cannot know, no matter how you tell them. The headlines were never the life. The covers were never the life. The life was always this: the crowded table, the gathered family, the man at the far end of it grinning at you across 4 decades. And the only tragedy is how long it takes some of us to learn that the ordinary thing was the miracle all along. People sometimes ask me, now that we are old, whether the wild reputation ever frightened me off, all those years ago. And I tell them the truth, which is that I was never marrying the reputation. I was marrying the man under it, and the man under it turned out to be the most loyal, most tender, most permanent person I have ever known, exactly as I suspected he would be that first night when I looked past the cloud and saw somebody hungry. The world got the legend, I got the man, and of the two of us, I have always known I got much the better end of the deal, because a legend is a lonely thing that belongs to everybody, and a man is a warm, specific thing that comes home to one harbor, and I have been that harbor for 40-some years, and there is no fame on earth I would trade for it. What do I understand now that I did not on that beach in the sun? I know that everybody who told me to run was wrong, and that the island girl who stayed was right, and that the staying was the truest thing I ever did. I know that the harbor I carried in my pocket as a child was the most valuable thing I ever owned, more valuable than any cover or any contract, because it was the one thing the right man needed. I know that surviving is luck and staying is work, and that we did the work, both of us, for 40 years, and the work built something no storm could take down. And I know most of all that the frightened wild man I met in that bright, loud room and was warned away from became, over 4 decades of ordinary days, the steadiest and most familiar and most beloved presence in my whole life, and that I would choose him again, cloud and all, 1,000 times out of 1,000, and set him a place at my table every single time. Chapter 18. Keith, the floor that held. I want to end where I am happiest, which is in our old Connecticut house, late at night, in a deep chair in the middle of all my books, with a cup of tea I will not finish, and a wife who will come down in her socks and cover me up. And there is one thing I understand now that I did not understand when I was a wrecked young man who did not expect to see 40. When I was young, I thought the loud thing was the whole point. I thought it was the roar, the danger, the adoration of strangers, the indestructible cartoon the world wanted me to be, and I chased every last bit of it. And I caught more than almost any man alive. And I am here to tell you, from the vantage of a long life, that the roar was never the point, and never could have been. The roar goes home when the night is over and leaves you alone in an empty arena. The roar does not know you. The roar cannot love you back. Everything I thought was the point turned out to be the noise I made on the way to the actual point, and the actual point was a quiet house, and a woman in her socks, and an ordinary morning, and a family who teases me about a pie. I had it exactly backwards for the first half of my life, and a Staten Island girl spent the second half patiently turning me around until I was finally facing the right direction. I think a great deal, at my age, about how close I came to missing all of it. I survived things that should have killed me, and for a long time I thought survival was my great talent, the thing I was known for, the indestructible man who could take anything. But here is what I finally understand, and that is the only thing I really know for certain after all these years. Surviving was the easy part. I always knew how to survive. Anybody desperate enough can survive. Staying is the harder magic, the real one, the one nobody hands you, the one you have to be taught, usually late, usually by someone better than you. I knew how to survive a storm. I did not know how to stay in a quiet room, to come home and keep coming home, to tune my whole loud life down to 5 strings, ringing as a chord around one steady woman. And that, the staying, is what I am proudest of in my entire life, more than any song, because the songs came easy to me and the staying did not, and the hard-won thing is always the one worth the most. People ask me sometimes, the younger ones, how a man like me ended up with the longest and happiest part of his life being the quiet domestic one, and they always look a little disappointed when I tell them, because it is not dangerous enough for the legend they came to see. I tell them to find the one who is home, not the most exciting one, not the brightest spark in the loudest room, because I had all the sparks a man could want and they nearly killed me. Find the one who is home, the one who knows you under the cloud, the one who would feed you at an ordinary table, whether you were a legend or a nobody. The one who will mark your page and cover you up when you fall asleep in your chair. Find that one, the harbor, and then spend the rest of your life learning the harder magic of staying in port. I survived everything the world could throw at me, and none of it taught me a thing about living. A Staten Island girl with a harbor in her pocket taught me about living, in a quiet house, over 40 years of ordinary days, and I am here to report an old man in a deep chair, surrounded by his books, that she was right about all of it, and that the floor we built held and is holding still and will hold the rest of the way. the floor kept holding its weight, year after ordinary year. Epilogue, the two of them, still in port. If you came to this book knowing every riff, you already knew the legend. If you came a stranger, maybe now you understand why a guitarist and a cover girl you may barely have heard of are worth 2 hours of your one short life. It is because they are all of us, scaled up and put under lights. A wrecked man who did not expect to live, and an island girl who carried a harbor in her pocket, who met in the brightest, loudest room of the most dangerous era, and who built, in the space the storm had nearly closed forever, an ordinary, beautiful 40-year life out of Sunday tables and quiet houses and cold cups of tea and a ridiculous rule about a shepherd's pie. I will give you the picture I want you to carry out of here, and it is not a stage. It is an old house in Connecticut at 3 a.m, full of books, with a man asleep in a deep chair and a paperback rising and falling on his chest, and a woman coming down the stairs in her socks to mark his page and pull a blanket over the most dangerous man in rock and roll, the way you cover a child who fought sleep and lost. They have been doing some version of this for 40 years, the harbor and the ship, the quiet thing and the loud thing finally tuned to ring together, and the man who survived everything has spent 4 decades learning in that quiet house the harder and better trick of staying. And he is staying tonight, asleep under a blanket she just pulled up, exactly as safe and as loved as a man is allowed to be. If you take one thing out of this house with you, let it be the smallest and least glamorous thing in the book. Surviving is luck. Staying is the work. Find the one who is home, the one who knows you under the cloud, and then keep coming back to port on the ordinary nights, with the tea going cold and the books left open, for as long as you both shall live. That is the whole secret, hidden in plain sight, in a quiet house full of books in Connecticut, on the kitchen counter, in the cold cup of tea nobody finished. That is the whole thing. That is what the harbor was for. That is what the staying was for. Love is hard. Love is worth it. Love stays. Author's note: this book is inspired by publicly available material about real people. Interior emotional content has been dramatized. No scandal, infidelity, abuse, or private family detail has been invented. Where the public record was silent, the narrative has been softened, omitted, or generalized. It is offered with deep respect for Keith Richards and Patti Hansen, and for the family they have built together. Every date, place, and milestone named here is drawn from the public record. Their meeting in 1979, the marriage on the 18th of December, 1983, Keith's 40th birthday on the beach at Cabo San Lucas in Mexico, their 2 daughters Theodora and Alexandra, the long Connecticut family life, and the more than 40 years they have stayed married. The exterior facts are drawn from interviews and reporting, and are verifiable in the public record. What is imagined is the interior, the private thoughts, the kitchen conversations, the feelings rendered in first person. These are an author's respectful imagining of what such moments might have held, built on the foundation of what the real people have said publicly about themselves over many years. No private quotation is invented and presented as fact. The wild years and the hard seasons are referenced only as the public record allows, in generalized and dignified terms, never sensationalized, because this is a love story, and only a love story. I wrote it because their marriage tells a true and useful thing about love, that a person can survive almost anything and still have to be taught the harder art of staying. that the right harbor can turn a survivor into a husband, and that the strongest love is sometimes the quiet one waiting at home, marking your page, pulling up a blanket, keeping the porch light on. If this book sends you toward your own harbor, toward your own home, toward forgiving someone or staying with someone or being brave about something quiet and good, then it has done its work.